Simplicity 9146 is one of the first patterns I ever sewed. These are a few photos from that first pair a few years ago. Today I've blended two linens together to create a contrast panel. These pants have an elasticated casing, side panels which allow for color blocking or stripe play, and an optional tie belt. We'll be adding the belt loops in this video, and I just used one of my own belts. These pants also have pockets, so they're the perfect multi-feature easy pants pattern. Let's sew them now. Place a corresponding pocket piece right sides together with the side edge of the front piece. Align your notches and pin in place. Now we'll pin the mirrored pocket piece to the side panel. Once again, aligning the notches. Sew each pocket in place with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now that the pocket is attached, flip the pocket over its seam and give that seam a good press. Sew the pocket to the seam allowance underneath with about 1/8 inch seam allowance from the top to the bottom of the pocket. Repeat for the pocket piece attached to the side panel. Place the side panel and the front pant piece right sides together as well as their pockets. And we're going to pin this seam from the top to the bottom of the pant. We're going to sew this seam from the top to the bottom of the pant with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to skip our stitching between the dots for the pocket opening. I'm going to mark the dots here. And I'll also draw myself a seam allowance above and below the dots of 5/8 of an inch. Sew along that 5/8 of an inch marking from the top to the first dot, back stitching to secure. Then start your stitching again at the second dot, once again back stitching to secure, continuing your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to the bottom of the pant. Pin the pocket pieces together all along the curved edge. Sew the edges of the pocket together with a 5/8 inch seam allowance from the top of the pocket around the curve to the 5/8 of an inch seam. Clip into the seam allowance at the bottom of the pocket from that pocket edge to the 5/8 of an inch seam. Cutting a slit into that seam allowance will allow me to finish the pocket edges and the side seams separately. Now that those raw edges are finished, I'll flip my side panel away from the front pant piece and give those seams a good press. We'll press that long seam allowance toward the side panel and press the pocket toward the front pant piece. Baste the pocket to the top of the front pant piece. We're going to top stitch from the top of the side panel to the bottom of the side panel. Keep your pocket out of the way for the initial stitches. Then you'll catch the seam allowance for the remaining stitches to the bottom of the pant. Top stitching with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Place your back pant piece right sides together with the side panel, aligning the notches and pinning in place. Sew this seam from the top to the bottom of the pant with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, then finish those raw edges together. Now with that seam allowance that we just sewed pressed toward the side panel, we're going to top stitch in the same way as we did earlier. Top stitching along the side panel side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance from top to bottom, making sure that you're catching that seam allowance underneath. Place the front and back pant pieces right sides together and pin the inseam. Sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges together, then press that seam toward the back pant. Repeat all of these steps to complete your other set of front and back pieces. Turn one set of front and back pieces right side out and place it inside the leg set, which is wrong side out. Align the crotch seam from the top of the front pant pieces to the tops of the back pant pieces. Also align that center seam and pin this crotch seam in place. Sew this curved seam from one side to the other with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and finish your raw edges together. I've applied interfacing to the wrong side of my front waistband piece. And I've also marked the dots which indicate the openings for the elastic. I'm going to place my front waistband piece right sides together with the casing and pin at both short ends. For both seams, we'll sew from the top to the first dot, backstitching to secure, start again at the second dot, again backstitching to secure to the bottom. Fold your belt loop piece in half, wrong sides together. Then we'll open out that fold and press both of the long edges to that center fold that we just made with the iron. Once those raw edges are both pressed toward the center, we'll fold this piece in half once again, wrong sides together, enclosing the raw edges. Pin in place along the open edge. Top stitch along both long edges from top to bottom. Cut this strip into 7 3-inch pieces. Place one short edge of each belt loop along the raw edges of the waistband, aligning them with the markings from the pattern piece. Baste those raw edges of the belt loops in place. Fold the top loose end of each belt loop to the wrong side by 1/4 inch and place it at the top belt loop marking. Edge stitch in place along the top folded edge, repeating for each belt loop. Fold the waistband in half, wrong sides together, and press along the center. Once it's pressed, baste those bottom raw edges together all the way around. Place the raw edges of the waistband and the raw edges of the top of the pant right sides together. The belt loops should be facing the pant, and the opening in your stitches should be facing you. Pin all the way around the top of the pant. Then we'll sew this waistband to the top of the pant all the way around with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges together. I've cut a piece of 1-inch elastic according to my elastic guide pattern piece. Now I'll pin one short end and begin lacing it through the casing. Once my elastic is partially inserted into the casing and I have 5/8 of an inch extending beyond one side of the opening, I'll pin that edge in place. Continue lacing the elastic through and do the same pinning on the opposite side. Now with both sides of the elastic pinned in place, you can try the pants on to see if the elastic is the correct length and shorten or lengthen if necessary. Once you're happy with the fit of the elastic, we can secure those ends once again, this time turning those ends of the elastic inside the front waistband. Repeating on both sides. Now we'll secure those edges of the elastic in place by sewing inside the seam on both sides, avoiding sewing over your belt loops. Using a needle and thread, we can slip stitch those openings in the waistband closed. Then finally, to keep your elastic from twisting around on the inside when you wear it, you can sew inside the center back seam. After trying on the pants, I've determined that I don't want to lose too much length at the bottom of the pant leg. So I've chosen to finish the raw edges all the way around. Now I'm going to fold those raw edges to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch. Once I have my hem pressed to the wrong side, I'll sew along my finishing stitches all the way around, repeating for both pant legs. And now the pants are complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.